Nonsense. So I moved my computer. It shut down the video. God, that's YouTube. Here I come. Anyway, I have to go and post my information again now. So bear with me as I disappear here. Well, I won't disappear. That's the sad part for everybody. I will be sitting online here reposting because the stupid thing just shut off on me. So let's see what we can do here. Okay. Facebook, as if you didn't have enough problems. As if you didn't have enough problems. Okay. Let's see what we can do here. Temporarily. I'm going to turn the mic off for a second here. Don't panic. Oh, for Pete's flippin' sake. Come on. Okay. Still trying. Facebook. Why do you curse me? Why do you trouble me? Why can't you just give me what I need? Still trying. There I am. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Oh, Lord. Now what? There we go. Okay. Let's just quickly do this. And I'll be right back. I promise I will. And I will never try to do anything again. Oh, and that won't let me do that. Oh, God, bless me. Heavens to Betsy. I'm darn close to swearing here because I'm very capable of it. Okay, why is that saying live, but it won't give me the live or let me click on it? Because it's crap. It's crap. I give up. I give up. I totally give up. Anybody who wants to try and... Still trying. Okay, so now, can we do it now? Yeah, okay, good. Ignore the noises in the background. Ignore the noises in the background. It's crap. I give up. I give up. Okay. Let's see what we get here. All right. Okay, and then let us return once that finishes posting, and let's set the other one. I'm still here, folks. I'm coming back. I'm just dealing with life in all of its complexity and Facebook in all of its complete uselessness. Or maybe it's Google. I mean, because I am using Chrome, and I don't want to suggest I know exactly what's wrong. Okay. I think we've got it. Well, that'll teach me to be spontaneous, won't it? I will never be spontaneous again, I promise you. But anyway, so back to the subject at hand. Oh, Lord. So we have flash flood warnings and all that stuff. It's not going to affect us, I don't think. We're in a fairly decent spot to avoid landslides and things like that. But there'll be other people in my area who may not be so lucky. It also, we may lose power because that happens when you have really bad storms and landslides, it takes out power poles. So if I just suddenly disappear without doing anything tricky, like I just did, which completely upset the whole system, but if I disappear, it's probably just the power went off. So just go about your business, talk among yourselves, enjoy your evening. You will be tad-free. But for now, you are not tad-free. So anyway, what was I going to say? God, I'm sure I was going to say something before everything blew up and we wasted 4 minutes. Oh, I should mention that what just came in today. Look, I brought my brother's turtle for show and tell, but he died on the way to school. My brother's going to be really angry. Anyway, this is my new book. I've just received some copies in the mail. For those of you, I'm sure all of you actually, there's not that many people listening, but for those of you who are listening who don't know, this is the new short novel that is part of the Ostenard series. This is the story of Hakatri and Inaluki, and it's a big important part of the lore of Ostenard, which, as anybody knows me knows, lore is something that less is more, but nothing's like lore. So I'm big on lore. Anyway, what else did I want to talk about? Just the usual, because Johnny is scared of the rain for some reason. Johnny is my big dog. Because Johnny is scared of the rain, he doesn't want to be inside. Okay, follow the logic here. This is dog logic. Because Johnny is scared of the rain, he doesn't like to be inside, because when he's nervous, he doesn't like to be inside. He wants to go out somewhere, usually to get to the lowest possible point, which probably isn't a good idea during landslide weather, but whatever. Anyway, so of course he is completely, every time he comes in, he is just dripping wet. He looks like a boar's, no, he looks, I don't know what he looks like. He looks like a crazy ass wet dog, and that's in fact what he is. And muddy paw prints all over the house. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just explaining something that's going on in the house at the moment. So we have a soaking wet dog who had mostly lost his skunk smell. I told you guys about him being skunked, and that was weeks ago, and it's mostly gone. You have to lean in really close to notice it. You have to actually put your nose up against his neck, which very few people are willing to do, as you can imagine. And except when he has been out in the pouring rain for some reason, because then it comes back. So he's running around the house. He's getting muddy footprints on everything. He's nervous. He's worried, and he smells like skunk. So that's our excitement for the evening. What other excitement for the evening did I want to share with you? I don't know. Nothing really. But that's what's going on. And me, I'm working. Deb's working, kids are doing their thing, mostly school-oriented. Not today, of course, because it's Sunday. It is my brother Arthur's birthday today, so I called him to wish him happy birthday, but he had snuck out, probably anticipating that I would call and not wanting to be stuck talking to me any longer than necessary. So I left him a message. And like my other brother, Stuart, they are both wonderful brothers, and I'm very lucky to have them. So shout out to Brother Arthur on his birthday. They're both younger than me. Stuart's about 6 years younger. Arthur's about 10 years younger. So sadly, they're not really young brothers anymore. They're both old brothers. It's just that I'm even older. And I will always be older, as I told them many times. And that's true, but it's no longer anything to brag about. It's more like a ticking time bomb. But they are both in good health, and I'm in good health, and we intend to go on for quite some time. So that's the other thing for today, my brother's birthday. Okay, anything else before I start reading? Because we've already wasted a gazunk of time. No, can't think of anything else. I'm just trying not to move too fast for fear of upsetting the live broadcast, which apparently is much touchier about things than I thought it was. Oh, God, help me. So, we're going back to reading Ordinary Farm. We were reading just started a chapter called A Hole in the World. And I hope you can see that clearly. That's a picture of the barn and the silo. And we were a couple of pages into that, so what was happening? Ragnar had appeared and announced that the egg had been stolen by Alamu, the male dragon, and they're assuming he will eat it, and so everybody is sad about that. And Tyler had been studying the books that Lucinda had found in the library about Octavio Tinker, and when we last were reading, Lucinda was trying to talk Tyler into trying to be friends with Colin Needle because she felt poor Colin just needs some friends, and Tyler was less than excited about that idea. And I think that's where we broke off. So that's where I'm going to continue. So, continuing with Chapter 18, The Dragons of Ordinary Farm. Colin? Tyler couldn't believe what he was hearing. You want me to make friends with Junior Dr. Evil? He really seems like he needs friends, Tyler. So does a skunk. That doesn't mean I'm stupid enough to pet one. You are so mean. Hold on. He waved his hand at her. Something had finally clicked. Come here, Luce. Look at this. She scowled, but wandered over. What? Okay, this is what the farm looked like in 1963. Most of the buildings are pretty much the same, but there's also a bunch of stuff that isn't here anymore. Like, see these buildings? He pointed to a cluster of shapes on the survey map that looked as though they should be between the house and the library. There's nothing there now, just a garden. Maybe that's the stuff that burned down in the fire. What fire? Ragnar said there was a fire. It was a long time ago. Uncle Gideon had a laboratory with all kinds of stuff in it, and he lost it all because the lab burned down. Wow, really? Tyler stared at the plans. Okay, that probably explains some of the missing buildings, but that's not what I wanted to show you. Look at this map. Really look at it. Lucinda squinted, wrinkling her forehead. What am I looking at? That's just it. What are you looking at? Don't you notice anything? He put his finger on the survey and traced the shape. Oh yeah, it all kind of makes a big spiral, like a seashell or something, when you look at the farm buildings and the house buildings. It was true. Although they weren't all connected, the buildings marked on the plan seemed to spin off from a single empty point at the center of the property. The shapes of the actual buildings were already strange and off-kilter, and the hole left by the burned-down buildings obscured it even more, so that Tyler had never noticed the shape while walking around the real farm, but here on the paper you could see it clearly. But why? Lucinda asked. Why build it like that? Because Octavio Tinker was a major nutcase, probably. Something else was still puzzling him, but he couldn't figure it out. Something missing, like a noise he hadn't even noticed until it had stopped. That stuff in his diary sounds like it comes right out of the Ultimate Scroll 2 strategy guide. Where's the haunted house thing? Lucinda chewed her lip. If that's the reptile barn over there, and that's the front of the house, then the haunted house thing ought to be right there. She put her finger in the center of the open space, the empty hub around which the building seemed to spin. Tyler stared. Whoa! You're right, Lucinda, you're right. The haunted house thing, as his sister called it, was the big, empty, windowless building they had passed when they first arrived at the farm. A weird structure that looked kind of like a scary mansion out of a movie, with ancient gray boards and a big tube that stretched down from it, like a mosquito's stinging snout. But that barn, or whatever it is, looks like it's been around since a lot farther back than 1963, so why isn't it on this map? It's not a barn, Lucinda said, leaning on him to examine the picture. Don't you remember they told us? She chewed her lip. It's, what is it? Oh yeah, a grain silo. But since most of the animals here don't eat grain, Uncle Gideon doesn't use it. So it's been here all along? He looked at the empty spot on the survey. Then it should be here on this map. But it isn't, so maybe they built it since then. Well, that's just weird. No one would build a silo just to keep it empty. He trailed off. Oh, man! Lucinda! Silo! S-I-L-O! So, what's... It sank in. Oh, my God! But the message in the mirror said, Olis. Yeah, that's silo backward. Tyler laughed, still amazed at how it had all come out. I bet all my allowance for the rest of my life that something in that mirror is trying to send us a message. And the message is, check the silo. It was all Lucinda could do to keep him from going at once to explore the place. He felt like a child being sent to bed early when she reminded him about the black squirrel, but he had to admit she had put her finger on a problem. For a moment, he considered sending Lucinda to explore the mystery in his place, but she refused before he could even suggest it. Forget it. I'm not going in some crazy haunted silo, she said very firmly. If you want to get killed by ghosts or collapsing farm machinery or something, then you do it. That night, Tyler lay awake for hours, unable to fall asleep, trying to imagine a way to thwart the spy squirrel. It came to him in the long, quiet hour just after midnight, something he had seen in a shed at the back of the house. He fell asleep at last and dreamed of buildings and people made of paper, all threatened by a spreading fire. All the next day, Tyler could hardly concentrate on anything. His mind was so full of what he was going to do. That Ragnar and even shy Haneb wound up shouting at him to be careful. He thought he would go crazy, waiting for it to get dark enough for him to get started. But after finishing the day's chores, he came back to his room and collapsed on the bed. The room was stuffy with afternoon heat, and he promptly fell asleep. He woke up to Lucinda's knock on the door. "Did you change your mind?" she asked when he stumbled over to let her in. "No," he said, suddenly panicked that he might have missed his chance. "What time is it?" The light coming through his window was tinged with the shadows of approaching evening. "Shoot!" He grabbed his sweatshirt, then went through the pockets to make sure he had not only his flashlight, but extra batteries. "Did you put that thing out for me?" he asked. Lucinda was watching him with arms crossed. "Yes, I did. Right where I said? The oak tree at the edge of the garden, right where you said yes." She shook her head. "Tyler, I don't think this is a good idea." "You never think anything is a good idea, unless it includes watching television or talking on the phone." "That's really mean, Tyler, and it's not true either. Who went into the library for you and saw the message and found you that map?" "Okay, I'm sorry. You're right. But we have like 2 or 3 weeks left before we go home. What if Uncle Gideon never tells us anything? What if he never asks us back? In like another year, we'll be wondering whether this even happened." "That doesn't seem very likely." "Whatever. I'm going. If you still want to help me, go downstairs and make sure nobody comes looking for me." He shouldered his backpack and let himself out, hoping he looked at least a little more like Indiana Jones than like some snot-nosed little kid running away from home to go live under the picnic table. The dark shape made the branches tremble as it hopped along above his head. Tyler did his best not to look at it, not that he wanted to, anyway. The squirrel was just plain creepy at the best of times, but now he had a bigger reason to look away. "That's right, you ugly old devil squirrel. You just keep following me." He stopped beneath the oak tree, dropped his backpack on the ground, and pretended to be tying his shoes while he felt along the trunk for the long handle. I'm just going to pause for a second. I don't know if it makes it to the microphone here, but the large dog just exploded upstairs. He's really upset. I think somebody must be delivering food. I hope you guys can hear this. It's hilarious. We've got 2 dogs. We're down to 2 dogs now. We've been very, very careless of our dog resources. We're down to just 2 dogs. One of them very large and a big barker, and the other tiny and nervous and very shrill. So the combination of the 2 is hilarious when they're both barking at the same time. Anyway, I'm going to start that paragraph again because I was laughing too hard to read. He stopped beneath the oak tree, dropped his backpack on the ground, and pretended to be tying his shoes, while he felt along the trunk for the long handle of the fruit picker. Perfect. There it was. Lucinda had left it leaning just where he wanted. He crouched, whistling tunelessly, and waited. After a few moments, he heard the scuttle and spring of the squirrel leaping from a nearby tree to the oak. Tyler kept tying and retying his shoe, waiting until the squirrel, as it usually did, moved to a lower branch. The thing was practically fearless. Well, this time he'd give it something to think about. The leaves rustled just above him, and he looked up slowly. There it was, 2 limbs up, about 4 or 5 feet out of Tyler's reach, even if he jumped. But he wasn't going to jump. Instead, he wrapped his hand around the fruit picker's handle and got onto his knees as though he was about to stand up. The squirrel stopped moving, waiting to see if he was going to throw a rock, as he had on so many other occasions. He heaved up the fruit picker like a giant butterfly net and whacked the basket over the squirrel just as it was about to leap to a higher branch. It squealed, the first time he'd ever heard it make a sound, a ghastly, high-pitched rasp like something being burned alive. It was so horrible that Tyler almost let go of the handle. The thing struggled hard, scrabbling against the thick, strong fabric of the basket. It was all he could do to find the wooden peg bouncing around on the end of the rope, but at last he grabbed it and pulled the basket shut. The squirrel was still struggling like a mad thing inside it, but for the moment it was caught, snorting and screeching in muffled rage. Tyler considered just bashing the basket against the tree over and over until he killed the thing, but had a sudden fear that he might only release it instead. Judging by the noises it was making, if it got out now, it would want to do a lot more than just follow him. He left the fruit picker propped against the branch, the rope tied as tightly around the handle as he could manage to keep the basket closed. Then Tyler ran off toward the front of the house and the rest of the farm. I did it! He felt like he could jump over the tall, turreted farmhouse. So what do you think of that, Squirrely? Not much, judging by the furious sounds from the tree behind him. Not much at all. It was only a few hundred yards from the house to the silo, if that's what the building really was, but as the lights of the windows faded behind him, he felt like he was scuttling across the dead surface of the moon. When he thought he was out of sight of the most likely observers, people tended to cluster at the kitchen end of the house. Tyler switched on his flashlight. The ground was bumpy and uneven, covered with dry grass, and he made as much noise as he dared. He'd seen a rattlesnake once up by the unicorn pasture and didn't want to step on one of those in the dark. The moon was behind the silo, so he didn't even see it until he was close enough to realize that a big black something was blocking the stars. Staring up at the weird shape of it, it really did look like a haunted house. Tyler had some serious second thoughts about the whole thing. Come on, stupid, he told himself. Don't be such a wuss. He knew he'd never manage to trap the squirrel again the same way. In fact, he was wondering if he'd ever be able to go outside the house at all with an angry devil squirrel after him. This was probably his one chance. He had walked past the tall old building enough times to know it had a door on the side perpendicular to the house. He crept around the silo, shining his flashlight and shuffling his feet loudly to warn away snakes or extra-large spiders. He found the door and began to look for a handle, but instead the weathered wood just dropped away under his hand with a quiet squeak as it swung open. Not even latched. Tyler swallowed and took a step into the silo, his flashlight held before him like a laser pistol. It was big inside. That was the first thing he noticed. A big, empty space with a ceiling so far above his head the flashlight beam couldn't reach it. It was also absolutely and completely empty. Tyler was standing on a little platform at the top of a flight of wooden steps that led down to the floor, which was about 20 feet below ground level. He swept the flashlight around and down to the floor. Nothing. Not even rats, which he had been thinking about in a slightly worried way. He made his way down the creaking stairs and onto the bottom of the silo. Not just empty, but extremely clean. If anyone had ever stored grain here, they had vacuumed the place afterward. He shined his light in every corner, but saw nothing. The place was empty. If there had been a secret here, it must be long gone. Then a glimmer on the floor caught his eye. He turned the light on it as he approached. Metal. The bolt on a trap door in the floor near one edge of the room. The bolt had a brand new lock through it. He rattled it in frustration. New and very strong. He had brought a pocket knife, but using a knife on that metal would be like trying to tunnel through stone with a plastic teaspoon. Something was definitely weird, though. Why leave the front door unlocked, but put some monster big lock on this door? What was down there? And how could he get through the lock without making so much noise it would bring everyone out of the house? And even if he cut through it somehow, how could he replace it so no one would know? The whole thing seemed almost impossible, and certainly wasn't going to happen tonight. Probably his last moment of freedom before he suffered death by squirrel. When he emerged from the dark silo, Tyler was amazed to see how much brighter things looked in the light of the moon. He walked around the building on the far side from the house, shining his flashlight beam along the walls in the unlikely chance there was another door he'd never seen in all the times that he'd gone past the odd building. There was no other door. There was, however, a gap that had opened up between the walls of the silo and the ground itself, like a narrow moat around a medieval castle. Tyler got down on his knees and looked into the space between the silo and the earth. The walls of the silo extended far down, almost certainly farther than the floor inside, which meant that if he went down far enough and found a way in, he would be on the underside of that tempting, frustratingly locked trap door. The boards were thick, but they were also old and had buckled in places, warped by years of moist soil. He hesitated before climbing down into the narrow space. If there were going to be snakes or giant spiders anywhere, this would be the spot. But his frustration at the idea of never finding out what was in here was stronger. It wasn't easy holding the flashlight in his mouth. Tyler was sure he was going to chip a tooth, but he needed both hands to make it down the crumbling earthen wall and into the soft dirt that had collected at the bottom, up against the silo's wooden boards. He crawled along, pushing on them, one after another. There. That one was loose. He braced himself with his feet against the wood on either side and began to pull at it. The nails gave a little. After a while, he realized he could use the flashlight handle as a crowbar. Soon he began to feel the wood loosen. When the board finally came out, he tossed it aside and stuck his hand through, swinging the flashlight around in the gap beyond. Nothing. Still dark. He couldn't even see the floor or the far wall. But if he turned the flashlight up, he could see wood close above him. That must be the floor with the hatch door, he realized. If he could get through, he would indeed be under it. He managed to work loose the board next to the gap, and after what seemed like another half hour of hard, sweaty work, it came free as well. The last nail pulled out with a screech that did not echo. The gasp was just big enough now for him to get his shoulders through sideways. Tyler had maneuvered his shoulders and arms through the space between the boards when the flashlight fell out of his mouth. He grabbed at it in panic, overbalanced, and tumbled through into suddenly freezing blackness. Nothing stopped him. Seconds went by, and still he plunged downward as though he was tumbling through the utter emptiness of outer space. He tried to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. Lucinda! His thought was like a leaf whipped in an icy wind. You were right, I'm so stupid! Falling. He fell forever. And forever was cold. Okay, chapter 19. The Secret Guardian. Not sure that we're going to get to some of the things I promised, but we'll get some other things. Chapter 19, The Secret Guardian. Lucinda had a bad feeling. Actually, she had several. Instead of all the farm folk being clustered in the kitchen and dining room as they usually were, where she could keep an eye on them as Tyler had asked, most of them appeared to have chosen this night of all nights to be somewhere else. Mr. Walkwell and Ragnar had gone out after dinner on some mysterious special task, the kitchen workers told her. Uncle Gideon was simply absent again, and Haneb was at the sick barn looking in on Meseret, who had been behaving strangely since she had lost her egg, so much so that everyone was afraid she was sick with some unknown dragon illness. Even the three amigos had vanished, perhaps gone with Mr. Walkwell and Ragnar, perhaps just back to their cabin on the far side of the farm, or off to the dormitory to play cards with the other farm hands. No one could say. Only old Caesar, Sarah the cook, and her two helpers, little Pema and tall Azinza, were in the kitchen, the women washing dishes while Caesar prepared to take a tray with tea and sandwiches up to Gideon. Which meant, Lucinda thought miserably, that Tyler could stumble into any number of people out there and get both of them in serious trouble. She picked up a dish towel and started drying. So, where's Mrs. Needle? She asked after a while. Azinza frowned at her. Child, why do you ask so many questions tonight? Mrs. Needle, she does not like us talking about her. Sarah made a snorting noise. That's the truth. She is secret like a wall with no window, that one. Caesar paused in the kitchen doorway, the tray balanced on one hand. You women folk do know that the devil finds work for idle hands, don't you? And idle tongues, too? Shaking his head, he went out. I think Mrs. Needle had tea with Mr. Gideon, Pema offered suddenly, breaking the silence that followed. She had the habit of looking down and speaking very quietly, so that sometimes you could only hear the soft murmur of a voice, but no words at all. She was pretty, too, like a doll, and although she looked older than Lucinda, she was half a head shorter. Being around Pema made Lucinda feel like a horse, or something even clumsier. Oh, she's probably having tea, all right, said Sarah, her mouth tight and her pale skin flushed with some emotion Lucinda couldn't quite read. With her little friend? Colin? Asked Lucinda. She wishes that were true, Sarah said with a snort. If she paid half as much mind to her fatherless child as she does to that animal, the boy wouldn't be up to such strange mischief. Pema took an audible breath. Even tall Azinza straightened up as though Sarah had said something dangerous. You shouldn't talk so, Azinza hissed. She hears things. It felt like something cold had clutched at the back of Lucinda's neck. Animal? What do you mean? That thing, Sarah said, ignoring Azinza's warning shake of the head. The usually cheerful cook folded her arms across her bosom. No, I won't be quiet. I'm a Christian woman, whatever has happened to me. She talks to that creature as if it were her own pet. What is godly in that? Sits and talks, and I swear he listens. Pema laid a small hand on the German cook's broad arm. Please, Miss Sarah, do not say any more. Azinza is right. It is foolish. It is foolishness to speak ill of. Of which? Sarah scowled. There, I said it. Don't these children have a right to know? She talks with a black squirrel, and it chatters back at her, for all to see. And only our good Lord knows what she has done to Mr. Gideon to make him so foolish. So, even as Sarah suddenly, startlingly, began to weep, Lucinda ran out of the kitchen in terror. Tyler was right. Lucinda could hardly breathe. A witch! Mrs. Needle really was a witch. She ran out into the yard, disoriented in the dark after the lights of the kitchen. She was sickened to think of Tyler out there alone, being watched by who knew what. She stumbled toward the middle of the open space, wishing the moon would hurry out from behind the clouds. She thought she saw the bulk of the silo now, but something was moving, something that caught the faintest sheen of moonlight. Tyler? She wanted to call out, but didn't know who might hear. The farm, which only a short while before had seemed strange but mostly safe, now seemed to be a nest of fearsome strangers. If that was Tyler, he was moving away from the farmhouse, not toward the silo, but out toward the pastures and the reptile barn. Perhaps he had already tried the silo and now meant to explore some other parts of the farm, but he didn't know how much danger he was in. She felt like a fool. Her brother had been right. She had been wrong. She had wanted everything to be okay, just like she always did, and she had kept her eyes closed to the things that seemed to suggest otherwise. A shudder went through her at the memory of Mrs. Needle's cold, bright eyes, the woman's pale hand on hers. When had that been? She remembered drinking tea with her, but not being touched. Mrs. Needle hardly ever touched anyone, even her own son. But now, the memory of that cool, white hand lying across her own seemed as strong and painful as a memory of being burned. The dark figure ahead of her was moving faster than she had thought. If it was Tyler, he was running. Had something happened to him? In any case, she could not simply let him roam the farm property without being warned. Too many of the farm folk were out tonight, and he needed to hear what Sarah and the others had said about Mrs. Needle. Something came to her. A noise? No, it was a feeling, a distinct sadness floating into her thoughts, like the wail of a ghost raising the hair on the back of her neck. Lost, gone, lost. The feeling swept over Lucinda and made her stop where she was, quivering as though a freezing wind had struck her. It was like a voice in her head, a voice without words that still spoke clearly of terrible grief and an equally terrible, deeply buried anger. Lucinda felt as though she couldn't hold so much sadness inside her, that she would burst like a balloon that had been inflated too far. Then the feeling was gone, although a sensation of powerful unhappiness lingered for several moments after. Lucinda's cheeks felt cold. She touched them with her fingers and found that they were wet with tears. What was going on here? Was it the ghost she'd seen in the mirror? What else could fill her with such a sensation of misery? Was the whole farm haunted? While Lucinda had been distracted, the dark shape, moving with surprising speed, had almost disappeared from her sight. She pushed herself away from the sheltering darkness of the buildings nearest the house and out into the clouded moonlight, one shadow following another. Whatever, or whoever, she had been trailing was long gone, and Lucinda was stumbling through a dark wood at the far end of the pasture lands, just at the base of the hills that marked the edge of the property. The moonlight seemed to have weakened, and she had turned around so many times in the shadow-spotted trees that she wasn't even quite sure which direction the house was in. She was crying a little, despite herself, frustrated and frightened, and was just about to sit down and wait until people came in the morning to find her when she saw a light a short way up the hill. Was it Tyler with his flashlight? No, it wasn't a flashlight at all, but the uneven flickering light of a fire. It must be the herders, Kiwa, Jed, and Hoka, who liked to sit beside their campfire late into the night, singing mournful, deep-throated songs that seemed to vibrate like plucked strings. Still, even in the dark, she didn't think she could have stumbled that far out of her way. Also, although she could now hear a single gruff voice raised in song, it didn't sound anything like the music of the three amigos. Lucinda moved closer, worry and hope fighting each other inside her chest. She could see the fire moving and sparking in the gentle night breeze, in a clearing just ahead, but there was no sign of the singer. She paused at the edge of the clearing, alarmed by the strangeness of the hoarse, yet plaintive song, like the howling of some lonely animal, set to slow, rhythmic music. Something was lying on the ground, just at her feet. She bent and picked it up. A boot, small as a child's shoe, still warm from the leg and foot that had been in it. As if in a dream, she reached her hand into it, then yanked it out, startled. It was stuffed with shredded paper, which rustled beneath her fingers. Something squeezed her arms against her sides with the strength of a giant snake. A huge hand folded over her mouth. Lucinda screamed, but no sound came out except a muffled murmur. She was lifted clean off the ground, feet kicking. Her heels beat against the legs of her captor, but seemed to make no more impression than kicking the trunk of an oak tree. Shh! A voice whispered in her ear, the hot breath making her squirm in terror. He will hear you. He has little enough freedom. Do not take this from him. Then she recognized the voice. She was still frightened, but at least she knew who held her. I'm going to put you down, Ragnar whispered. Do not run. It will startle him, which might be dangerous. Do not speak, either. He will be off soon to look to the fences. She had no idea who he was, but she nodded her head. The big man set her down as if she weighed no more than a coffee cup. For a moment, overwhelmed by the strangeness of the night, the succession of shocks and surprises, she almost ran away despite her promise, but something inside held her back. No one's hurt me. Ragnar wouldn't do anything to me. Strongest of all, though, to her surprise, was that she wanted to know. For once, she wanted nothing more than to get answers to the questions that were swarming in her head like startled bees. A moment later, a shape came springing down the hillside. There was just enough firelight to show its odd, jerky movements. It was dancing, she realized, leaping and capering with arms stretched high as if to clutch at the stars. From the waist up, it had the shape of a naked man, slender and muscled. But below that were the haunches and narrow hooved feet of a deer or goat. The head dipped down for an instant into the firelight, and Lucinda almost screamed. The face was Mr. Walkwell's. The animal man leaped up again, then whirled around and was gone, bounding up the slope with tremendous speed and agility, disappearing over the crest of the hill. Lucinda, her knees suddenly too weak to hold her weight, sank down to the ground beside the discarded boots, the paper that had spilled from them crunching beneath her. He's Mr. Walkwell's She shook her head, shocked. What is he? Ragnar laughed. He is one of the old ones, child. I do not know the right name for his kind, but the Grekers worship them as little short of gods. The Greeks, I mean. Sometimes I still do say the wrong words, despite all my years here. Lucinda picked up Mr. Walkwell's boot. The whole night felt like a dream, but she knew it wasn't. The poor man. He has to walk in these. No wonder he goes so slow, always having to hide what he is. Not always. Ragnar helped her up and led her across the clearing toward the stone circle in which the fire burned. When she knelt to warm her hands, he crouched beside her. The nights are his, like this one. Is he from... Does Mr. Walkwell come from the same place as the dragons and the unicorns? Ragnar poked the fire with a long branch. A few sparks drifted up and winked out. I do not know all of Simos' story because he was here long before the rest of us came, but in a way that is true. He is from the same place as the dragons. We all are, but place is not the right word. It is hard to explain. Maybe somebody should try, she said, but without anger. She had lost that back in the trees. No one ever tells me or Tyler anything until we find it out for ourselves. A sudden thought made her heart race. Tyler! He's out exploring! I have to find him! He will be well, the bearded man said. Nobody will come onto the farm and hurt him. when Simos is on guard. It wasn't people getting in from outside she was worried about, but people who were already here. One person, anyway. Sarah and the others, they said that Mrs. Needle is a witch. Ragnar frowned and took a moment before answering. It is true that where she came from, that is what they called her. They would have killed her for it, too, but your great uncle trusts her, and she has helped him, there is no doubt of that. After the fire took his laboratory and all his things, I thought he would waste away in sorrow, but since then she has helped him find new life, new purpose. Lucinda's mind was still whirling with questions, but before she could ask anything else, Ragnar stiffened and rose. A knife that she had not even seen was suddenly in his hand, glinting in the firelight. A moment later, a bizarre, lumpy shape came swinging down the hillside, sometimes upright, sometimes going on all fours. Before she could do more than take a frightened breath, the weird thing came to a sudden halt at the edge of the clearing and split into two pieces, one of which fell to the ground. Mr. Walkwell straightened and prodded with his hoof at the bundle he had just dumped. He rolled it over, revealing a pale face and slack, open mouth. He looked up from the motionless man at his feet and cocked an eyebrow at Lucinda, who had shrunk back into Ragnar's shadow. What is the child doing here? He seemed more irritated and embarrassed to be standing in front of her naked, although he was so shaggy he might as well have been wearing trousers. Lucinda could not help staring. Even trousers would not have hidden the fact that he had hooves instead of feet, and it was almost stranger to see him without his hat than without pants. Where his hair had blown back from his forehead in matted, sweaty curls, she could see pale, circular marks. The place where his goat horns grew, she realized, although he had cut them off or filed them down. With his scraggly beard and the fire reflecting red in his eyes, he looked like the devil himself. Lucinda should have been terrified, but the face was still Mr. Walkwell's, the man who hated cars and carved wooden toys for children. Don't blame Ragnar. It's my fault, she said. I was out looking for Tyler. I got lost, and then I saw the fire. Ragnar crouched beside the strange man Mr. Walkwell had dumped on the ground. He was wearing clothes and a dark stocking cap. Where did you find him? Ragnar asked. Beside the junction road fence, said Mr. Walkwell. He only got a few steps past it. I came down on him from behind. He did not have time to see me. The old man had just run out to Junction Road, then run back carrying a large man on his back, all in a quarter of an hour or less, Lucinda realized. There was another thing Tyler had been right about all along. Mr. Walkwell wasn't just inhumanly strong, he wasn't human at all. Is he dead? Lucinda asked. Ragnar shook his head. Simos has only stunned him. We want these people to know they are not welcome, and for that they must live to tell those who have hired them. He had finished going through the man's pockets. Empty, of course, but I will wager that if you find his car, you may also find a telephone with the number for that greedy man, Stillman. Ragnar sighed heavily. He is digging to see what he can find, or perhaps just reminding us he is out there. This is a problem that is not going away. I don't understand, Lucinda asked. Who's Stillman? A bad man. A rich man, too. He is a descendant of the Tinker family, and he wants this farm. Anything else, Gideon will have to tell you himself. If I find the telephone, I will bring it back. I do not understand those things, and I do not want to, Mr. Walkwell said. He looked sternly at Lucinda, as though she might have been about to peddle him a cell phone herself.
It makes my head itch even listening to people talking into one. They hardly work here anyhow, Ragnar said. He had pulled off the unconscious man's clothes, leaving him only his underpants, socks, and undershirt. He didn't look very dangerous now. He is ready, Simos. Mr. Walkwell leaned down and scooped the man up like a bag of groceries, then slung him across his shoulder. I will take him back. He and his master will have something to think about when he wakes up. A moment later, he had bounded off so quickly that Lucinda had completely missed the point between going and gone. She could smell him, though, a tang that was not unpleasant but still made her nostrils twitch. As for you, we take you back to the house, Ragnar said. You have had enough questions answered for one night. Yes? Lucinda nodded. Tyler would be safe. How could anything bad happen to him with a magical creature like Mr. Walkwell guarding the farm?
And we did come up just well, I could read the first, I'll read the first few pages of this one, since we're almost out of time, but we've still got 4 or 5 minutes. Chapter 20, last one. Sorry, not lost one. Chapter 20, last one. And there's a picture of me. Tyler wasn't falling anymore. Now he seemed to be floating in darkness, but floating didn't come close to describing how uncomfortable he was. He was so dizzy that ordinarily he would have felt sick to his stomach, but he couldn't find his stomach. It didn't even seem like he had a body. It seemed as though he was only a brain floating in some jar of dark liquid, eyeless, voiceless, helpless. But he was still cold, shockingly, shiveringly cold. No body, but still freezing. How unfair could things get? Tyler tried to move and found he could feel his body a little, but it seemed impossibly distant, as though his head was a kite and the rest of him was a mile below him, holding the string. He began to wonder if something really bad had happened to him. Was he unconscious? Crippled? Worse, was he dead? A kind of angry strength surged through him at the thought. Whatever was going on, he wasn't just going to accept it. Tyler Jenkins didn't just let things happen to him. He made things happen. He exerted all the strength of his thoughts to push the darkness away, to go somewhere, to wake up, to do something. Nothing happened. He tried again and again. He thought of heroic things. He thought of terrible things, and then told himself only he could stop them from happening. He thought of the people he loved, his mom, his dad, even Lucinda. Yes, he supposed he really did love her, as much of a pain as she was sometimes. But none of these thoughts did anything to change the terrible facts. There was nothing to push against. There was nothing to get away from. He was lost in complete emptiness, floating in unending black like a bubble in a tar pit. Tyler cried then, or at least he thought he did. It was hard to tell. And that is where we're going to stop, because that's the end of a little section there. And next we'll be surging forward into more adventures. More adventures! More adventures! Okay. So, as we come to the end of our 8 o'clock, I will remind you that I will be back next week. As far as I know at this point, still 1 a.m. Sunday, Pacific Daylight Time, and reading more about Tyler's adventures at this part, and the last one, which is the name of the chapter. And just to mention my happy news for the week, which is my book is about to hit the stores. My new one, my new Ostenard book. If you know somebody who likes fantasy but is terrified of getting into the monstrous megatomes that I am unfortunately so well known for propagating, you could give them this one. It's like the shape of what was the heart of what was lost. It's fairly short. See, it's a slim volume. It's not meant to be one of my gigantic, massive things that you can use to defend yourself if you suffer a home invasion or something like that. Which is, it's a good thing to have some books that size around because, man, you could stun an intruder. And if you hit him with 2 Green Angel Tower, at least the hardcover version, that sucker is dead. So anyway, that's my news for the week. Raining here, but that's good. We need the water as long as all of it doesn't take all of the hills around us away. I will be back not tomorrow night because this is Sunday night. So I will be back, as I said, next Sunday, 1 a.m., and then again at 7 p.m., and continue reading. We've still got at least a couple more weeks left of Ordinary Farm, and then I have to decide what next. I might read the sequel. Who knows? Anyway, with that, I want to thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you for putting up with the thing. I don't think I even got a chance to say hello to people tonight, so I apologize for that. Look, Jim and Emily and Kristen and Yara and Becca and Felina and Mark and Carl and another Beth and John and Chris and Ray, Claudia, Lisa. Hey, sweetie, good to see you. Barban, Tim, I think I already said hello to, but if I didn't. Anyway, lovely to see you all. Sorry, I was just about to say hello to everybody tonight when the whole thing crashed, as you may have already noticed. If not, you can watch the hilarious replay in the first live video from the evening. Anyway, with that, I'm going bye-bye. So bye-bye. Y'all be good. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your loved ones. Be good to your friends and neighbors. We will all take care of each other, and that way, even if we fail utterly, we will